Hello, AP US History students, and welcome back to another video of AP US History. We're in Unit 4, which is time period uh, 5 on the AP College Board. It's from 1844 to 1877, or actually, yeah, 1844 to 1877. Today, we're going to kind of move forward and talk about things that happened in the 1850s. There's a whole lot of things to unpackage in the 1850s that led to increased sectionalism. So this is a big lesson in material that is creating more sectionalism and more of this divide. Um, and we're getting closer and closer to the war. So if we take a look here, we'll go ahead and dig in here. Now, we know that by this time, when we think of the economics, we know that the North is more industrialized. The West, we have farming in the Northwest, um, or in the Midwest, I should say, in the Midwest. But we also see, in the South, the agriculture and then the ideas, the extension of land moving out westward with the extension of slavery. We know that the Southerners produced more cotton and other crops, but did not develop much industry, where the North was more industrialist. We know that in the 1850s, the periods for crops from the South, especially cotton, the price will stay high and they'll have pretty substantial profitability in the 1850s. Um, we know that we've gone through the Compromise of 1850, where California became a free state, and then we have the other territories that are going to use popular sovereignty. But we continue to move westward, this whole idea of manifest destiny. So we're seeing these moves happen over and over, like we're taking more and more land and we keep moving further and further west. Now, Stephen Douglas is going to introduce a bill called the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854. Now, Stephen Douglas is from Illinois. He was in the House of Reps from 43 to 47 and was a senator from 1847 to 1861. Now, Stephen Douglas wants to help build the transcontinental railway across the United States, connecting the East and West coasts. And in order to do that, we need to take territory and make them into states so that we can expand people, expand the railroad. Now, he is not the only one to help. He had Andrew Butler from the South that helped with this. Kansas Nebraska Act. And the South would not agree unless, to the statehoods of any of these territories, unless the idea of slavery was on the table. So Douglas believed that he could create this Kansas Nebraska Act in which they would use popular sovereignty. And once again, what is popular sovereignty? The idea that the people in that territory that are applying for statehood could vote for themselves on whether or not the new state would have slaves or not. So Kansas and Nebraska are kind of the areas of the Louisiana Purchase that still have yet to be uh, created into statehood. Now, Kansas is right next to Missouri, and then the Nebraska territory is everything all the way up to the 49th parallel at this time. So they wanted to use this idea of the Kansas Nebraska Act. Now, if this Kansas Nebraska Act bill passes, it would essentially undo the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which banned slavery north of the 3630 line. So if they go ahead and they agree to this, which they eventually will, it created more sectional tensions, and it deemed the Missouri Compromise null and void. It created a firestorm of opposition because it allowed slavery north of that 3630 line. Um, Now, politicians were very divided on this, and Douglas thought that this would be a peaceful. Stephen Douglas expected this issue to be solved peacefully, that just letting people vote. and letting people, the state, to decide. Unfortunately, he was wrong because we're going to see a bunch of violence break out because of this. Okay, because of this Kansas Nebraska Act. Now, when the Kansas Nebraska Act was passed, by we're going to see a new political party called the Republican Party, which opposed the expansion of slavery into the new territory. Now, the Free Soil Party is on board with that idea of not expanding slavery. The Whig Party essentially is for the most part pretty much gone. Many of the Whigs will join the Republican Party, but the Kansas Nebraska Act will pass in 54. Now, the question then becomes, if we go ahead and we draw a line here, the question will be, does the line go all the way across here, right? That was the original intent, like I shouldn't say original, the the Missouri Compromise stopped it, like here, right, where the end of the Louisiana Purchase territory. Then the Compromise 1850 wondered, does this line go all the way across? Well, it's not going to do either. If we accept this Kansas Nebraska Act, we're essentially opening up this area here to slavery and all of this area up here for slavery. So we're definitely changing the accessibility or the possibility of slavery to extend. So originally it was just, slavery was just going to be in these pink areas here. But now, because of the Compromise 1850, these yellow areas would be opened up to slavery for popular sovereignty. And then because of the Kansas Nebraska Act, now these purple areas are going to be opened up for slavery. So it really enlarges the expansion of slavery. So once again, we could see the old Missouri Compromise here prior to Texas becoming a state, and we could see the slaves were permitted in the green area up here in the top left-hand corner. We're up in the top left-hand corner up here, and we could see all the orange was where there would be free territory. Then we know the Missouri Compromise essentially was kind of somewhat null and voided with the ideas of the Compromise 1850, because if that line continues straight through here, then that means if Utah decided to have slavery, that would be north of that line. Okay. So we can see that the availability of slavery is extending into that New Mexico territory and Utah territory with the Compromise of 1850. Then with the Kansas Nebraska Act, now we can see that additional. And so all this kind of in the yellowish tan is now with the ideas of popular sovereignty could lead to slavery. It's the decisions up to the territories. So once again, that could dramatically change the landscape of our country. The Compromise 1850 and now the Kansas Nebraska Act. So we're going to see a lot of people, both abolitionists and pro-slavery people, are going to flood the territory of Kansas and Nebraska. And Kansas was up for voting first, and led to a lot of violence. And we're going to see that John Brown, an abolitionist, and his sons are going to go to Kansas, and they're actually going to kill some pro-slavery people. But we're going to see a huge amount of violence, a lot of rioting and looting and burning down houses and burning down buildings. It's really uh, the violence and the bleeding in this bleeding Kansas um, led to a deeper division within our country. It even led to a division in the Democratic Party. Um, and once again, this debate over slavery could turn, this proved that the debate over slavery could turn explosive and violent, right? Very violent. Now, when they go to vote on their statehood, there were only about 3,000 people living that were eligible to vote that were living in Kansas, but over 6,000 people voted. So people on, a lot of people saw there were fraudulent voters. We saw, if we go back to the map, we actually see people from Missouri. If we look at the bottom map, people from Missouri that was a slave state went to Kansas to get Kansas to become another slave state. So there was all this lawlessness and all these terrible things. And President Pierce did nothing to keep order, and he failed to support an honest election. President Pierce, wanted uh, Kansas to become a slave state. So this led to some more controversy. Okay, this led to more controversy. But once again, we see that the states, or the territory, with fraudulent votes, is going to try to become a slave state. Now, here is a picture, a painting depicting the violence, and you can see the shootings over here, the burning down of houses, a lot of lawlessness happening in Kansas at this time. Now, though we had this violence that was occurring out west with the ideas of the expansion of slavery, we also saw violence in northern cities with the movement of a new political party, the American Party. Now, a huge amount of of immigrants came to America, and they had different religions, language, ethnic backgrounds. And we saw that in America, especially in the cities, because most immigrants came to the north, to the cities in the north, and then we saw a lot of immigrants move out to the Midwest. But we saw a lot of Irish Catholics stay and work in the factories. We saw this growing hatred between the Catholics and the Protestants. America at this point is a very Protestant nation, and they become very anti-Catholic. And so there becomes this huge amount of violence in the big cities between immigrants and native born Americans. We will see the collapse of the Whig Party, and we'll see this new party develop, the American Party. Okay, and they had extreme nativist views. The American Party also became known as the Know Nothings. Okay, the these Know Nothings was this new era of native policies. Um, and they believed in Know Nothing. They were called the Know Nothings because when people questioned about the American Party's beliefs, they would always say, "I know nothing." Right? They kind of kept some of those anti-immigration ideas to themselves. Now, while the fighting over slavery grew, the fighting for immigration will eventually fall. By the end of the 1850s, we'll start to see some of this nativist ideas start to disappear for a while because of the eventual Civil War and the unrest when it comes to the institution of slavery. But during the late 40s and early 50s, we do see the American Party being quite popular. Now, we will see, because of the Know Nothing movement, we will see in Chicago the mayor, who is part of the Know Nothings, part of the American Party, actually orders his police force to enforce an old ordinance requiring bars to close on Sundays, primarily in ethnic neighborhoods, because a lot of the ethnic people, the immigrants, um, their only day off was Sunday from the factories. So that would be the day they may go to a bar. Well, now they're saying you have to shut down these bars. And in these ethnic neighborhoods, the liquor's license used to be $50 a year. Well, instead, they moved it up in Chicago to $300 every 3 months. So it was $1,200 a year. So this was kind of targeting in Chicago. This was targeting the Irish and German communities. Those kind of, like, we call them ghettos. Today we think of really negative connotation of the word ghettos, but back then, ethnic ghettos, like the ethnic communities, ethnic neighborhoods of that time period. So we saw that happening in the city. So we saw violence in the early 50s and mid 50s in the cities over uh, the ideas of immigration and the nativist movement. And then out west, we saw violence when it came to, like, Bleeding Kansas and the expansion of slavery. So there was a lot of violence going on in our country at this time. Now, because of the um, because of the Bleeding Kansas, Massachusetts Senator Charles Sumner is going to give a famous speech, "The Crimes Against Kansas." The Senate heard about the looting and the burning in Lawrence, Kansas, and heard about John Brown's murders. Now, when it comes to John Brown and the things that were happening, we're going to see that some people are for this violence and others are not. Um, so Charles Sumner is going to denounce the Kansas Nebraska Act, and he attacks Stephen Douglas. He attacks Andrew Butler from South Carolina, Stephen Douglas from Illinois, and Thomas or Andrew Butler from South Carolina. He attacks them verbally and talks about these crime against Kansas and these terrible things that are happening because of the idea of slavery. So another senator from South Carolina, Congressman Preston Brooks, who is related to Andrew Butler, says is going to defend the South and defend his kin because they're related, Andrew Butler and he. And Preston Brooks actually comes to the House floor, grabs his cane, and literally starts to beat um, Senator Charles Sumner. And you can see in this picture there are people laughing in the background. Now, Sumner will be injured and won't actually he'll take almost a year to recuperate from the harsh beatings that he took here. And people actually they started calling Preston Brooks Bully Brooks, but Brooks looked at maybe having a duel against him, but he said the duel is for gentlemen, and he said that Sumner is not a gentleman, because of the things he said. So once again, we see violence in Bleeding Kansas with common people, and now we see violence in our own legislative branch in DC. These are supposed to be educated gentlemen, right? So we see violence in both areas. Um, and once again, this Preston Brooks, when he's on the floor and he attacked um, he got a lot of approval from Southerners. Southern people actually made canes and mailed them to him as kind of like thanks for doing that, right? So we really see a lot of this animosity and conflict happening once again, not only in Kansas but in D.C. Now, in 1856, in the fall, because that happened, the caning happened in the spring of 56. In the fall of 56, we will see the Republican Party that had formed in 54 is going to run in the next presidential election in 56. And when we look at this, um, we see that Preston, or I'm sorry, Preston. We're going to see the Democrats nominated Buchanan, James Buchanan, who's a Northern Democrat. The Democrats kind of refused to nominate Douglas or President Pierce. They didn't want anything to do with President Pierce because of their involvement in the election, or not an election, in the Kansas Nebraska Act. So the debacle with that. So James Buchanan was in Britain at the time, and so he wasn't really involved in that. Now we see that with this election, there's a huge voter turnout. Buchanan wins, but when we look at the overall results, we see Buchanan gets 59% of the electoral college, 45% of the popular vote. Fremont, who's the Republican candidate, he gets 33% of the popular vote. He gets over 1.3 million votes to Buchanan's 1.8 million votes. And then Fillmore, um, who runs as um, the American Party that know nothing, gets just under 900,000 votes. So we can see our country is definitely divided at this time when it comes to this election. Now, Buchanan, um, he, once again, he was a Northern Democrat. But when we think of Fremont as a Republican, he believes in no slavery expansion, the homestead, a free homestead, and tariffs. Fillmore, the American Party, once again, anti immigration. Now, this election showed a strong Republican showing. This election 56 actually foreshadows the future. We will see from 1860 to 1932, Republicans will win all presidential elections except four. So in the next 72 years, we're going to see essentially Republicans in the Oval Office, except for four times. So this really uh, um, the Republicans are going to use the bleeding Kansas and the beating of Senator Sumner as rallying calls to try to get people out to vote. But James Buchanan, the Democrat, will win the election. Now, in 57, we're going to see a famous court case. Now, we call it the Dred Scott decision. If you were to look at it, let me get the little if you were to look at most cases, they just say the name. So really, you might just see it as Scott v. Sanford, okay, of 57. You might not see Dred Scott. You might just see Scott versus Sanford. So just be aware of that. Now, this court case, the ruling of this will be on March 6th, 1857. This is 2 days after Buchanan was sworn in as president. So people believe that Buchanan may have interfered with the election. Now, Dred Scott was a slave that was brought up through Illinois from the South, through Illinois into Wisconsin. And with his slave owner, they lived in Wisconsin for 2 years. Now, when they were going to return, he believed that he should be able to have his freedom because he lived in free territory. So he's going to try to sue for his freedom. Now, the Supreme Court is ruled by Chief Justice Roger Taney, a very pro South, pro slavery Supreme Court justice. And he is essentially the Supreme Court is going to rule that the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional. All right, that the Chief Justice ruled that the Congress had no right to regulate slavery in U.S. territories. So that the Missouri Compromise unconstitutional, and that slaves were property, and that slaves were not citizens. Therefore, they could not sue. So the Supreme Court really undermined the authority of Congress in the Missouri Compromise in limiting where slavery can be. Now, Northerners thought the Supreme Court couldn't establish the law of the land. That really upset a lot of people. Um, but essentially, this verdict is delighted the Southerners because, in the Southerners' eyes, this verdict opened up all of the Western territory up to slavery. That everything that is territory out west that hasn't applied for statehood now could be opened up to slavery. So Southerners were very pleased with this decision. Now, many people, believe that Buchanan interfered, which he did, right? Um, and Lincoln was very critical of this decision. And a lot of people were angered that Buchanan may have interfered with this decision. Once again, Buchanan is a Southern sympathizer and is for the ideas of slavery. So this happens in 57. Once again, they will rule that the Supreme Court is going to rule that the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional, that people of color are not citizens, and Congress can't limit property. Okay. So, like I said, they're denying people of color citizenship, and they cannot sue in a court of law because of that. So once again, this is a very pro-slavery decision. Okay, so this is creating more animosity within, creating more sectionalism within our societies. Now, we will see also in 57, we will see the attempt of the Lecompton Constitution. Now, a lot of issues over Kansas with the Bleeding Kansas and the Kansas Nebraska Act. Both pro slavery and anti slavery groups are going to try to establish their own governments within the territory. Now, the abolitionists, the anti-slave people, try to create what they call the Topeka Constitution, which would create a free state of Kansas. But the pro-slavery group tried to write they wrote the Lecompton Constitution, which would make Kansas into a slave state. Now, James Buchanan supported this Constitution. He supported, the Constitution. He feared rejecting it would cause him to lose support. Now, Stephen Douglas, who followed the ideas of popular sovereignty and was part of that whole Kansas-Nebraska Act, here he is not going to support the Lecompton Constitution. He's actually going to go against it because he thought of it violated popular sovereignty. So Douglas is defying Buchanan and his own party and vote to refuse admissions to Kansas. Now, this will later on, this will uh, cost Stephen Douglas uh, when he runs for presidency in 60. Uh, he will not get the full Democratic support. He'll only get Northern Democratic support. He will not get Southern Democratic support because the Southern Democrats will be upset with him because he is not supporting the extension of slavery by accepting the Lecompton Constitution. Now, eventually, Kansas will join as a free state in 1861. Now, as much as we talked about like Uncle Tom's Cabin being such an important document, we're going to see, or an important book, we're going to see another book written by Hinton R. Helper in 1857 called The Impending Crisis of the South. And if we take a look at some of the statistics, and this is in your AMSCO book, um, they talk about he uses data, he's using scientific data, or he's using numbers to demonstrate that slavery in the South is not actually beneficial. That in the South, we can see there's significantly less. Oh, where's my? Oh, there it is. There's significantly less patents in the South versus the North, like new inventions. There's more value in the churches in the North versus the South. We see more papers and periodicals and journals. There's more money in the banks in the North versus the South. And the overall exporting value is greater in the North than in the South. And once again, they're kind of disrespecting the South. Now, the South will ban this book and say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. The South will also contradict the ideas in this book and argue about the wage slaves, suggesting that the North they have factories and they're paying people, but they're paying people so poorly that people are living in poverty and squalor, and that it's actually worse off than slaves. So that's going to be their argument. Now, as much as people in the North support this book and the South, are banning it and saying it's terrible, what people are just don't know yet what's about to happen a short period of time in the same year, we're going to see economic woes here in our country. We're going to see the Panic of 1857. Now, this Panic of 1857 is the first worldwide economic panic. Now, the Panic of 1819, the Panic of 1837, those are more American panics. But the Panic of 1857 is the first worldwide economic panic. European markets decline, they stop purchasing stuff from the US. So we see a lot of the industry in the North failing. Okay, the railroads were hit hard. We see a lot of those investment houses are going to be hit. We're going to see people losing jobs. Unemployment is rising. But but the South will prevail. It's though we see this decline of our economic system. The South, because there are still relatively high prices for cotton and high prices for products, and it's more of a stable economy for the products that the South is producing and selling. They actually kind of save America from an extended panic, an extended depression, economic depression. So, of course, the South will gloat. Hey, look at us. On the backs of slaves, we saved the American economy. And there's that famous King Cotton's speech that you should have read in your reading packet from James Henry Hammond. Once again, because the cotton prices stayed high, Southerners believed that the plantation economy was better than the Northern manufacturing economy. Um, this um, this kind of proved that the North needed the South to help maintain a stable economy. So once again, even though that impending crisis of the South was written and published, here the South goes, look what happened. We helped save our country. So this is kind of like a backhanded slap to Hidden Helper's book. Um, so once again, this is creating more division that we'll see within our country. Then we'll see in 58. In 58, we will see the famous Lincoln Douglas debates. Um, Douglas, once again, was the incumbent senator. He's talking about protecting democracy, where the Republicans are slavery should not spread to new territories. We have to keep the Union together. Now, Lincoln will give this famous argument or his famous speech: a house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not extend or expect the union to be dissolved. He's about preserving the union here. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become all one thing or all the other. Now, though Lincoln loses the race, he becomes very popular and really popular that he ends up running for president on the Republican ticket. Now, when he wins in November of 1860 as president, when he wins the presidential election, Southerners are going to go, you remember that House divided speech? You remember how he talked about we can't be half one, half the other? They're fearful that he is going to end slavery, even though that technically at this point is not the Republican platform. They're very fearful for that, and that will lead to secession. That will lead to succession. All right. Now, in 1859, we will see John Brown. Now, John Brown, we know he's famous from his dealings in Bleeding Kansas. He is going to go to Virginia and he's going to grab the armory, the arsenal, and try to encourage slaves to rise up and revolt. He thought that if he got them guns, they would revolt and they would fight for their freedoms. Um, he will be captured. His sons will be killed. He will be tried. He'll be arrested, tried, and eventually executed. But he essentially talks that now, if it be deemed necessary that I should forfeit my life for the furtherance of the ends of justice and mingle my blood further with the blood of my children and with the blood of millions in this slave country whose rights are disregarded by wicked, cruel, and unjust enactments, I submit, so let it be done. Now, believe it or not, by this time, uh, people like Lincoln is going to start to further himself from someone like John Brown because there are a lot of politicians that don't want to resort to violence to end something. They want to do things more diplomatically and not use violence. So we're going to see some politicians kind of pull away from these violent uprisings to end slavery. That they would rather do more of a diplomatic thing here. But the South said Brown's actions showed the North's true intentions to use slave revolts to destroy the South. Um, you know, is he a martyr? Is he a traitor? It depends on your point of view. Here is the old Harper's Ferry, the arsenal where the arsenal was here. Um, the question is, how should John Brown be remembered? Is like once again, is he a martyr? Is he a traitor? Is he part of this bigger conspiracy to encourage, uh, um, you know, to use violence to destroy the Southern um, slavery economy? So there are going to be some people that distance themselves from him, but others are going to look at him as a hero. Okay. So it really depends on your point of view on slavery, and then also your point of view on the use of violence to to rebel against unjust laws, or if you use diplomacy against unjust laws. So it really depends on your point of view on how you look at John Brown and his actions, whether it's in Bleeding Kansas or when it's in Virginia at Harper's Ferry. So by this time, we see that by the mid 1800s, by the 1850s, we have the Democratic Party that opposed that strong central government. They're more like the Articles of Confederation. We know that the Democrats are divided. There's Northern Democrats and Southern Democrats, right? They're divided now, especially with Stephen Douglas's refusal of the Lecompton Constitution. The Whig Party, which was kind of made in retaliation to Andrew Jackson, they are going to kind of cease to exist in the early 1850s, and many of those people will go to the Republican Party. We're going to see the Know Nothings, the American Party. They're opposed to immigration. They took a pro-slavery platform in '56. They they were joined by some of the anti-slavery Whigs, but once again, they're only going to be around for a short period of time. Then the Free Soil Party, they are going to kind of disappear and kind of moving towards the Republican Party. But once again, they don't want the extension of slavery into new territory. And then the Republican Party, who many were opposed to slavery. They were opposed to, it was really, the Republican Party was created in the opposition to the Kansas Nebraska Act, but they'll have their own platform. When Lincoln runs, that's all about tariffs and the Free Homestead Act or Free Homestead Land and infrastructure and developing our economics. But they don't want the extension of slavery. So we're seeing different political parties develop throughout the 18. We see a few disappear and a few develop in the 1850s. So by this time, you should be able to explain what caused violence in the Kansas Nebraska territory, explain the decision of the Dred Scott case, and what was the impact of the decision. What does a nativist believe when we think of the American Party or the Know Nothings? We should be able to evaluate the impact of the Panic of 1857 and the South's perspective on that. And then we should analyze the actions of John Brown. Is he a hero or is he a traitor? Okay. So, with that being said, until next time, have a great day.